There's a particular kind of silence that happens in a house right before something breaks, not the comfortable silence of an empty room. The other kind, the kind where everyone's still talking, still passing the salt, still laughing at the right moments. But underneath it, something has already shifted, and only one person in the room knows it yet. I'm that person in this story. I knew it 3 weeks before anyone else did, and I spent every one of those 3 weeks acting like I didn't. Before I tell you how it ends, I want you to do something for me. If you're watching this from somewhere I've never heard of, a small town, a big city, another country entirely, drop it in the comments. Tell me where you're tuning in from tonight, and if any part of this story sounds like something you've lived through, yourself, with your own family, your own basement, your own version of a son-in-law who thought he was smarter than the room, tell us that story too. We read every single comment. Hit like and subscribe before you go any further, because the second half of this one is going to get uncomfortable fast. My name is Walter Hendricks, 66 years old, 34 years in construction management, the last 11 of those years finally mortgage-free on a 4-bedroom house on Birchwood Lane that my wife Carol and I built our whole life inside of. 2 kids raised in that house. Our son Eric lives 2 states away now with a family of his own. Our daughter Megan stayed close, married a man named Derek, and gave us a granddaughter named Willow who is, without exaggeration, the single best thing that has happened to this family in a decade. Derek sold commercial insurance, did well at it too, by every outward measure. Nicer truck than mine, the kind of watch that costs more than my first car. None of that bothered me on its own. What bothered me, slowly, over 2 years of holiday dinners was the way he talked. Not loud, never loud. Derek didn't ask for things. So he announced them and waited to see if anyone had the nerve to object. In March, his business hit a wall. Some kind of regional restructuring at his agency, commissions drying up for 6 straight months. Megan called Carol crying twice that spring. We helped where we could, the way family does, and I never once resented a dollar of it. Then came the Sunday dinner in May that changed the shape of my entire summer. Derek waited until dessert. I noticed that detail later, replaying the evening in my head like film footage. He waited until every fork was in motion, until everyone was relaxed and off guard, and then he set down his coffee and said the exact sentence I have never once liked hearing in my life. So, we wanted to run something by you guys. Carol looked at me. I kept eating my pie. Our lease is up at the end of the month, he said. And with everything going on financially, renting again doesn't make sense right now. We've been talking, and we think the smart move, just temporarily, is for us to move into the basement here. Get back on our feet, save up, and be out within the year. The basement, my basement. The home gym I'd built piece by piece over 6 years, the workshop bench positioned exactly right to catch the morning light, the pool table, the one room in that entire house that was unambiguously, completely mine. How long is temporary, I asked. 6 months, maybe 8. I looked at Megan. She wasn't looking at me. She was studying her plate like the wood grain held some kind of answer she needed. Let us think about it, Carol said. Derek smiled. I filed that smile away the same way I file away a hairline crack in a foundation, because he smiled before Carol had even finished the sentence, like the outcome was already decided and our thinking was just a courtesy he was patient enough to wait through. I didn't say anything that night, but I started watching. The campaign began the next morning. Megan called twice in 2 days, each call a little more emotional than the last. Certain phrases appearing that sounded borrowed rather than her own. We just need a fresh start. Family's supposed to help family. Carol softened in real time over the kitchen table, and I watched it happen the way you watch weather change, slowly, then suddenly. I did not soften. I called Derek directly and asked him plainly what the financial picture actually looked like. He got vague fast. Talked in generalities about timing and the market turning around. I asked if he had any savings left. He said most of it had gone to keeping things afloat, and he'd rather not get into the specifics, that it was personal. It's my basement, Derek. It's about to become extremely my business. A week later, he came by alone on a Thursday. No Megan. Sat across from me with the posture of a man closing a deal. I get the sense there's hesitation, he said. There's caution, I corrected him. Honestly, Walter, what's the basement being used for that's so critical it can't flex for a few months? A gym and a pool table? Derek, that basement is the one space in this house that's entirely mine. I built it myself, board by board, over 6 years. It has a purpose. Me, he recalibrated. I just thought family didn't usually need this much convincing. Family, I said, is a word people reach for when they want something without asking properly. That landed harder than I expected. I watched the salesman's polish slip for half a second before it snapped back into place. Look, I wasn't going to bring this up, but Megan's under a lot of stress right now, and stress puts pressure on a marriage. Pressure on a marriage doesn't stay contained, Walter. It reaches Willow eventually. There it was. My granddaughter's stability dangled over my head like a debt I owed for the privilege of saying no in my own house. Let me talk to Carol, I said. He left satisfied, the way a man leaves a negotiation he believes he's already won. I stood at the window and watched his truck disappear around the bend. And somewhere in those 15 seconds, I made the decision that would define the next 4 months of my life. I called Gus Pelletier, my old site foreman, retired now into commercial security work. I'd trusted Gus with million-dollar job sites. I trusted him with this. I need cameras, I told him. Audio too, where it's legal. I've already checked. Single-party consent. This state allows it. Inside and out. Quietly. Before anyone moves in. A quote. A long pause. Walter, what exactly are you expecting to happen? I'm not expecting anything, I said. I'm preparing for everything. He laughed. The kind of laugh that wasn't short. Came out 2 days later and installed 7 units. Basement stairwell, basement common area, kitchen, living room, back deck, driveway, and one in the workshop corner, tucked carefully into the ceiling joists where I insisted on the most discreet placement of all. I didn't tell Carol, not because I was hiding anything from her in 36 years of marriage I never have, but because I needed her, needed everyone, to act naturally. If she knew, she'd watch differently. I needed this to unfold exactly as it was always going to unfold, with nobody performing for an audience they knew was there. I didn't know it standing in that basement watching Gus run cable along the joists, but those 7 cameras were about to save my marriage, my basement, and quite possibly my daughter's entire future. I also didn't know how close I'd come to losing all of it before any of that payoff arrived. Derek, Megan, and Willow moved in on a Saturday at the end of May. For one afternoon, watching Willow run for the swing set, everything felt like it might genuinely be fine. Then Monday came. By Tuesday, Derek had rearranged my workshop, not organized, rearranged. My pegboard, calibrated by hand to the half-inch, restructured. My bench, positioned for 30 years to catch the morning light, pushed against the far wall. The flow was off, he told me. This works so much better. It's my workshop, Derek. I figured since I'm down here too, we could share the space more efficiently. I moved my bench back that night after everyone slept. He moved it again 2 days later, while I was at a doctor's appointment. I moved it back a second time. We did this dance 3 times before I decided my energy was better saved for what was actually coming. What was coming arrived in week 2. I was on the back deck at 6 in the morning, my coffee hour, when my phone buzzed. Basement camera, motion alert. I opened the feed expecting nothing. Derek was pacing, voice low in that register people use when they think no one's listening. The longer we're in here, the more normal it becomes. That's the whole strategy. Walter's not getting any younger, and once Carol's fully on board, which she basically already is, this thing has a real shot at being permanent, not temporary. I sat very still on that deck. A pair of geese crossed the lake at the end of the street, unhurried, taking their time. I texted Gus, "You're going to want to hear what's accumulating." He texted back 2 words, "Save everything." 2 days later, something happened that I almost missed, and it might have been the most important 40 seconds of footage in this entire story. Reviewing the prior night's motion alerts, I caught Carol on the kitchen camera at 11 at night, alone, holding her phone, looking at old photos of Megan as a girl. She set the phone down, put both hands flat on the counter, and said quietly to an empty room, "I don't know how to fix this without breaking something." I sat with that clip a long time. I didn't show it to her. I didn't need to embarrass her over a private moment that wasn't meant for an audience, but it told me something critical. Carol wasn't blind to what was happening. She was a mother holding 2 impossible truths at once, that her daughter needed support and that her household was being quietly colonized, and she hadn't yet found a way to honor both without one costing her something she couldn't get back. That clip changed how I moved going forward. I stopped thinking of this as me protecting the house from Derek. I started thinking of it as buying Carol time to arrive at her own clarity, on her own schedule. By week 3, the pattern had fully revealed itself. Derek wasn't simply staying, he was building a case, brick by brick, for permanence aimed directly at Carol, the spouse he'd correctly identified as the softer target. I heard him say almost exactly that on a recorded call to a friend named Tyler. Carol's the one to work on. Walter's stubborn, but Carol wants harmony more than she wants to be right. If she's on board, Walter eventually folds just to keep the peace. He wasn't wrong that Carol wanted harmony. He was catastrophically wrong about me folding for it. Megan, for her part, was almost entirely absent from these calculated conversations. Every recording showed a woman simply exhausted, grateful for a roof, unaware her husband was negotiating for permanent residence using her own marriage as collateral. Then came the Wednesday I almost lost everything on. I'd come home early from a doctor's appointment and found Derek in the basement, standing directly underneath the corner camera, head tilted up, studying the ceiling joists with the focus of a man who'd noticed something he didn't expect to notice. My stomach dropped into my shoes. Gus had mounted the unit carefully, painted the housing to match the joist color, but an insurance man's eye, trained to spot anomalies for a living, could still catch the seam if the light hit it wrong. That afternoon, the light was hitting it exactly wrong. Lose something? I asked from the stairs, keeping my voice flat. He didn't turn around right away, thought I saw some kind of wiring up here. Probably an old smoke detector line. Probably, I said. House is 29 years old. Half the wiring up there doesn't go anywhere anymore. He looked a beat longer, long enough that I ran through what I'd say if he climbed up for a closer look, then shrugged it off and went back to his boxes. I went upstairs, poured a glass of water I didn't actually want, and stood at the sink until my hands stopped feeling like they belonged to someone else. That was the closest the whole operation came to unraveling before it had finished doing its job, and it taught me something I already half knew. Patience under pressure isn't the absence of fear. It's choosing not to let the fear pick your next move for you. I called Gus that night. He came back 2 days later under cover of a routine plumbing inspection, recessed the housing another half-inch into the joist bay, repainted it, and ran a thin strip of foam along the seam to break up the line the eye catches. Should be invisible now, he told me, but if he noticed it once, he might notice again. Then we moved faster than I planned, I said. 2 days after that close call came the Friday that broke everything wide open, for good. I was at the hardware store, of all places, picking up a part for the dishwasher, when my phone lit up. Driveway camera. Then immediately, living room camera. I opened the app standing in the plumbing aisle. A van, not Derek's truck, an unfamiliar moving van, backed into my driveway. 2 men I'd never seen in my life carrying boxes into my house. Boxes that weren't there that morning. I called Carol, at her sister's. Hadn't seen a thing. I called Megan. No answer. I drove home with my heart doing something I hadn't felt since a crane incident on a job site 15 years prior, a cold, focused alarm that clears out every unnecessary thought and leaves only the relevant ones. I pulled into my driveway behind the van. Through the living room window, Derek was directing the movers, pointing at the corner where Carol's reading chair had sat for 11 years. "That one's getting donated," he told a mover. "We're bringing in our own furniture for this room. It's basically our space now anyway. Our space. My living room. Furniture I'd never agreed to remove, being replaced by furniture I'd never agreed to accept. I want to tell you I walked in and exploded. That would be the satisfying version, the one where a man finally snaps and the audience gets their catharsis early. That's not what happened. And if you've sat with enough of these stories, you already know why. Explosions are loud, and loud is exactly what tips a man like Derek that the game has changed. What I felt instead, walking up that driveway, was something colder and infinitely more useful than rage. It was the feeling of a trap finally closing, except the trap wasn't mine. It was his. He just didn't know it yet. "Derek," I said pleasantly, stepping through my own front door, "what's all this?" He turned, and for exactly half a second I watched a man recalculate in real time, watch the professional composure drop and then snap back into place like a lid sealing over something it didn't want seen. "Walter, hey. We figured since we're settling in, might as well bring some of our own pieces in. Make it feel more like home for everyone." "For everyone," I repeated. "Yeah, exactly." I smiled at him the way I used to smile at contractors right before pulling out a stack of documentation that ended their afternoon. "Let's all sit down. Megan too, when she's back. I think it's time we had a real conversation." He had no idea how real. Megan came home 20 minutes later to find the movers gone, sent away by me with a politely firm explanation that their services were no longer required today, and her husband sitting at our kitchen table looking like a man who suspected, correctly, that the ground had just shifted beneath him. I didn't raise my voice once. What happened next worked precisely because I didn't. "I have something I'd like all of us to hear," I said, and set my phone on the table and pressed play on the recording from week 2. The basement. Derek's voice, low and confident, talking about retirement accounts and eventual permanence, and Carol being the soft target. The kitchen went silent in a way I'd never heard our kitchen go silent before. "That's," Derek started, and had nothing to follow it with. "Illegal," he finally managed. "You can't record people without single-party consent," I said. "Checked it before the first camera went in. It's legal in this state, it's my house, and the cameras were disclosed in writing on a notice I taped to the basement door, which I have photographic proof you removed within 48 hours of moving in." I had, in fact, recorded him removing it. I didn't need to play that clip. Watching his face, I didn't need to. Megan looked at her husband the way you look at a building you've lived in for years upon discovering it was built on a sinkhole. "Carol's the soft target," she repeated quietly. "You said that about my mother." "Megan, that's taken out of context. Did you tell my parents this was temporary? Did you tell them 8 months, 6 months, and then start planning to bring in your own furniture in week 3? Did you tell them that, or did you just decide it for everyone?" Derek's jaw tightened. He looked at me like a man checking whether there was a single ally left in the room. There wasn't. I played the second recording, the one with Tyler, the one where Derek laid out the entire strategy in his own words. Patient, calculated, methodical. The word he used was leverage, referring to his own wife's stress as a tool to manage Carol and me into permanence. When it finished, nobody spoke for almost a full minute. Carol, home halfway through and sitting silently absorbing all of it, finally said the only thing that needed saying. "You used our daughter's exhaustion as a negotiating tactic against her own parents." Derek didn't have an answer for that. "There isn't one. I want to be clear about something," I said, and this is the part I'd been quietly building toward for 3 weeks. "You have 2 weeks to find other arrangements. Not 8 months. Not 6. 2 weeks. Walter, be reasonable. Where exactly are we supposed to?" That's a question you should have been asking yourself honestly back in May, instead of building a long-term strategy around my generosity and my wife's patience. He looked at Megan, clearly expecting an ally, expecting the marriage to close ranks the way it apparently always had. She looked back at him with an expression I will remember for the rest of my life, the look of a woman doing fast arithmetic on years of her marriage and not liking a single number she was finding. "I need some time to think," she told him. Not me, him. The next 2 weeks were not peaceful. Derek tried every angle available to a cornered salesman. He appealed to Carol directly, reminding her how close Willow felt to her grandparents, conveniently forgetting he was the one engineering the exit. He appealed to guilt, suggesting that throwing out family during a hard time said something ugly about who we really were. At one point he suggested, with astonishing nerve, that the cameras themselves were the real betrayal in this story, not the recorded content of his own scheming. Carol, by this point, had watched every recording herself, including the call where Derek explained to Tyler exactly how to manage her specifically because he'd read her as the conflict-avoidant one in the marriage. Carol is many things. Conflict-avoidant, it turns out, stops being one of them the moment she hears herself described as a target on a recorded phone call. "Get your things out of my basement," she told Derek on day 9, in a tone I had genuinely never heard from her across 36 years of marriage, and one I sincerely hope is never aimed at me. Megan came to find me alone on day 11. We sat on the back porch, the same spot where this whole thing started, with a beer and a bad feeling in my gut. "I didn't know about the furniture thing in advance," she said. "Or the call with Tyler. I want you to know that. I know. I'm angry at him, not at you." I looked at my daughter, and for a moment I saw her at 7 on that same swing set, at 16 asking me to help her practice parallel parking in this same driveway, and the woman beside me now, doing the hardest math of her adult life in real time. "Dad," she said quietly, "I think Derek and I need some serious conversations. Maybe with a counselor, maybe without one, depending on what he says when it's just us." "I think that's exactly right," I said. "There was one more thing Megan told me that afternoon that I haven't mentioned yet. And it's the detail that, looking back, made everything that followed feel less like punishment and more like simple consequence finally catching up to a pattern." She told me Derek had done something similar once before, early in their marriage, with a different relative. A smaller version of the same maneuver over a car he'd borrowed and never quite returned. An arrangement that started as a week and stretched into 11 months before her cousin finally forced the issue. I hadn't known that story. Megan hadn't told us at the time because, in her words, it seemed small, and I didn't want you to think less of him before you'd even gotten to know him properly. Sitting on that porch, she finally let herself say what she'd been unwilling to say back then. "I think I've known what he does for a long time. I just kept finding reasons to call it something else, end quote. That was the moment I understood this had never really been about a basement at all. The basement was simply the largest, most consequential version of a habit Derek had been quietly practicing on smaller stages for years, and nobody, including the woman who loved him, had ever sat him down and made the cost of it visible until now. Before I tell you how this ended, I need you to understand what I did during those final 2 weeks, because it's the part of this story I almost didn't include. I didn't just wait for the 2 weeks to run out. I spent that time building something Derek never saw coming, something far more permanent than anything he'd tried to engineer against me. I went to my attorney, a man named Phil Ashworth who'd handled every contract dispute I'd ever needed in 30 years of business, and I had him draft a formal notarized statement, signed by Carol and me both, explicitly documenting the temporary nature of the original arrangement, the date it was offered, the date it ended, and a clause, just in case, asserting that no verbal agreement, no matter how Derek chose to characterize it later to anyone, including potentially in a custody or divorce proceeding down the line, constituted any claim whatsoever to residency, ownership, or equity in our home. I had Phil notarize a second document too, one cataloging every recording, time-stamped, transcribed, and legally obtained, stored both digitally and in hard copy in a safety deposit box neither Derek nor anyone else would ever have access to. I wasn't building a defense. I was building a wall so high and so well documented that if Derek ever tried, now or 5 years from now, to claim he'd been promised anything beyond temporary shelter, there would be nothing left for him to stand on. Quiet men don't threaten. We file paperwork. Moving day, the actual final one, came on a Tuesday 2 weeks later, almost to the hour. I was on the deck with my coffee. 6 in the morning, when Derek came up from the basement with the last box in his arms. He set it down on the counter and didn't immediately leave, which surprised me. "I'm not going to pretend what I did was fine," he said, the first honest sentence I'd heard from him in 3 weeks. I got greedy about the situation. I let myself believe that if I was patient enough, this just became permanent, and I stopped seeing it as your house and started seeing it as an opportunity. "That's the most honest thing you've said since May," I told him. "Megan and I are going to try to work through this. I don't expect you to root for me. I just wanted you to hear that from me directly." I didn't say much back. I didn't owe him absolution, and he wasn't really asking for it. Just acknowledgement that the sentence had been spoken honestly out loud. He nodded once, picked up the last box, and that was the final conversation Derek and I had in my kitchen. They left by 10 that morning, into a small apartment Derek's sister helped them find on short notice. The irony of someone else's family stepping up to catch what Derek had tried to permanently extract from mine, not lost on a single person in that house. Carol came and sat next to me on the deck afterward with 2 cups of the good coffee, the kind she saves for complicated days. "When you said you needed cameras back in May," she said, "I thought you were being paranoid. I know. I was wrong. You were just paying attention." We sat there a long while, until the sun was fully up over the water. 3 months later, Megan called to tell us she and Derek had decided to separate. I did not celebrate that call. A marriage ending, even one built partly on a foundation I'd watched crack in real time on a security feed, is not a victory. My daughter was in pain on the other end of that phone, and that mattered infinitely more to me than having been right. But when Megan brought Willow up to the house that first weekend afterward, and Willow ran straight for that same swing set, and Megan sat next to me on the porch and finally asked the question I think she'd been sitting on for weeks. "Dad, how did you know this early it would go this far?" I thought about the workshop bench he'd moved without asking, the smile before Carol finished her sentence, the moving van I never approved, the word leverage spoken into a phone he thought no one else could hear. "I didn't know," I told her honestly. "I just refused to assume good faith past the point where the evidence stopped supporting it." She leaned her head on my shoulder the way she used to as a girl. "You were ready the whole time." "No," I said. "I was just paying attention the whole time. There's a difference, and it's a difference that matters more than people think." Willow's laughter carried up from the yard, bright and uncomplicated in a way nothing else about that summer had been. "My basement is fully mine again. The bench sits in the morning light exactly where it belongs, and somewhere in a safety deposit box across town, there's a folder Derek will hopefully never need to learn exists, because he'll never give me a reason to open it again. What I think about most, looking back, isn't the anger, because honestly there wasn't much of it by the end, just a tired kind of clarity. What I think about is how easily people mistake a quiet man's generosity for an absence of attention. They see someone who built something slowly, over decades, and assume patience like that is available to be spent down without consequence. What they don't understand, because quiet people rarely explain themselves until it matters, is that the patience isn't permission, it's observation. It's 7 cameras, a cloud server, a notarized file in a bank vault, and a recorded sentence about leverage that a man said out loud, certain no one else would ever hear it. The basement is quiet again, the bench is back in the light, and if you've made it this far with me tonight, I'd ask one last thing before you go. Hit subscribe if you haven't, drop a like if this one held your attention the way I hope it did, and tell me in the comments what you would have done differently in my position. I read every answer, and some of the best stories we've ever told started in that comment section. We'll see you in the next one.